My own son called me from thousands of miles away and said, "Mom, we're leaving for Europe tomorrow. I sold your lake cabin and your car. We needed the money. Goodbye." And just like that, 40 years of sacrifice gone in seconds. Do you know what it feels like to realize the child you raised sees you as nothing more than a bank account? That the love you poured into him could be tossed aside with a cold voice and a quick hang-up. I sat frozen in the doctor's waiting room, the phone heavy in my hand, my heart pounding. But instead of breaking down, I felt something else rising inside me, a calm I hadn't known since my husband's death. Because in that moment, I remembered Martin's final gift, a small iron box hidden in my closet, and that is where my story begins. I was sitting in the doctor's waiting room, staring at a crooked poster about heart health when my phone rang. The sound sliced through the quiet hum of people waiting with their aches and secrets. I grabbed it from my purse, expecting maybe a reminder from the pharmacy or a call from Marjorie, my neighbor. Instead, I heard my son's voice. "Mom," Caleb said, flat businesslike. "We're moving to Europe tomorrow. I sold your lake cabin and your car. We needed the money. Bye." Then he hung up, just like that. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt as if someone had opened a trapdoor beneath my chair and dropped me into cold water. My name is Serena Rowan. I'm 72 years old. I buried my husband Martin just 6 months ago. I thought grief had already carved me hollow. I didn't know it could still dig deeper. I stared at the phone, waiting for it to ring again, for Caleb to say he was joking. For some sign that my only child hadn't just sold the most sacred parts of my life like they were garage sale leftovers. But the screen stayed dark. Across from me, a young father bounced a restless toddler on his knee. Beside me, a woman in scrubs scrolled on her phone. The normalcy of their lives only sharpened the wound of mine. "Ma'am, you all right?" the nurse asked softly, touching my arm. Her badge read Tina. She was no older than 30, with the kind of clear eyes that hadn't yet seen too many funerals. "I'm fine," I whispered. My voice sounded strange, distant. Just a wrong number, but it wasn't. It was the truest, ugliest number I had ever received. The doctor, Dr. Chen, eventually called me in. She poked, prodded, and listened with her stethoscope. "Your heart sounds steady," she said, "but you need to eat better, rest more, sleep. Like a cat in a thunderstorm," I said. She smiled gently, the way young doctors do when they are trying to comfort their older patients without lying. "Grief doesn't follow schedules. You're doing better than you think." Better than I think. She had no idea. I thanked her, nodded in all the right places, and left. My body was healthy, she said, but my life, my family, broken. At the bus stop outside, I sat down heavily on the cold metal bench. The city buzzed around me, horns, footsteps, laughter spilling from a cafe, but all I could hear was Caleb's voice. "We needed the money." The lake cabin wasn't just property. It was where Martin taught Caleb to fish, where we spent every 4th of July grilling hot dogs and watching fireworks reflected on the water. In my car, an old Buick that smelled of Martin's cologne, where his fingerprints still clung to the steering wheel, gone. 40 years of sacrifice erased with a single phone call. A woman with a stroller stood nearby, humming to her baby. Watching them, my throat tightened. Once I was that mother, carrying Caleb's world in my arms, dreaming only of keeping him safe. Now he had discarded me like yesterday's newspaper. The bus pulled up with a wheeze. I climbed aboard, dropped my coins into the slot, and sank into a seat by the window. Portland rushed past, storefronts, food carts, college kids with backpacks, a man selling flowers at the corner. They were living their lives, unaware that mine had just cracked open. I pressed my hand to my purse, where the zipper always caught on the same tooth. Hidden inside, beneath a folded handkerchief, was the thing that stopped me from collapsing completely, a small iron box. Martin had given it to me 2 weeks before he died. We had been at the cabin, sitting by the fire. He slid the box toward me with a look I couldn't quite read. "For later," he said, "when later comes." I had tucked it into the back of my closet, meaning to look at it someday. But grief is a thief. It robs you of time and memory. Until that moment in the doctor's waiting room, I had almost forgotten it existed. Later had arrived. The bus hissed to a stop on Maple Lane. My neighbor Marjorie Portillo climbed aboard. Juggling 2 grocery bags, she spotted me instantly. "Serena, well, don't you look like you saw a ghost and it slapped you?" I tried to smile. "Hello, Marjorie." She plopped down beside me, her lipstick bright as ever. "I brought plums from my nephew's tree, ugly as sin, sweet as heaven, take some." She shoved the bag into my lap before I could argue. Her kindness cracked me open. My eyes stung, but I blinked hard. "Caleb called," I said. Her eyebrows shot up. "And," I swallowed. "He sold the cabin and my car. He's leaving for Europe tomorrow." Marjorie gasped so loudly the man across the aisle looked over. "That ungrateful Serena, I swear if I had that boy here I'd wring him like a dishcloth." Her outrage made me laugh, a short, broken sound that startled even me. "Don't you dare laugh this off," she said, pointing a finger. "You've given that boy everything, and this is how he thanks you." "I don't know what to think yet," I admitted. "Think about yourself for once," she snapped. "You're not just a mother, Serena, you're a person, don't forget that." The bus jolted. And Marjorie's words stayed with me long after she got off 2 stops later. Back at home, the house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something lonelier, something like dust and silence. I set Marjorie's plums on the counter and sank into Martin's old armchair. The phone rang again. Not Caleb this time, our cabin caretaker, Tommy Finch. His voice was uneasy. "Ms. Rowan, I got a call earlier. From Caleb. He said the new owners want the locks changed tomorrow. Asked where the spare keys are." I gripped the receiver. "And what did you tell him? That my contract's with you, not him?" "Don't worry, I didn't give him a thing. But is it true? Did you sell?" "No, Tommy," I said firmly. "I didn't sell anything. If anyone comes around, don't do a thing without my say-so. Call me first." Relief flooded his voice. "Got it, just wanted to be sure." After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the window where Martin once tapped his coffee mug every morning to call me over for a kiss. My reflection looked back at me, older, wearier, but with a spark in the eyes that hadn't died yet. Caleb thought I had nothing left. He thought he had stripped me bare, but Martin had prepared me. He always planned ahead. I went to the bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled down the iron box from the top shelf. My hands shook as I set it on the bed. The metal was cool. Solid, heavier than it looked. I traced the scratches along the lid, the marks of Martin's hands. In the junk drawer, under rubber bands and old takeout menus, I found the small key labeled tackle in Martin's handwriting. My heart pounded as I fitted into the lock. The box clicked open. Inside lay several envelopes, a photograph of Martin and me at the cabin, and a letter with my name written across it. My throat closed as I touched the paper. But before I could read, the doorbell rang. I froze. Through the window, I saw a young woman in a sleek blazer, holding a leather folder. A silver car idled at the curb, a man in sunglasses behind the wheel. "Ms. Rowan," the woman called sweetly. "I'm with Viero Holdings. We're here regarding the Lake Everhart property. Your son authorized us to finalize paperwork." My pulse hammered. I didn't open the door. "I don't sign anything on my porch," I said firmly. "Leave your card." She hesitated, then slid a glossy business card onto the rail. "We're only trying to help you avoid legal complications," she said. "Litigation clears the sinuses," I replied coldly. "Goodbye." Her smile faltered. She retreated to the car. I locked the door, leaned against it, and whispered to Martin's picture in the iron box, "You clever man, what have you left me?" The house was quiet, but I could almost hear his voice. "For later, Serena, for later." And later had finally come. I sat at the kitchen table with the iron box in front of me, the metal still cold against my fingertips. But before I dared to open it, my mind drifted where it always did when the word cabin came up, back to Lake Everhart. That place wasn't just a property, it was our sanctuary. Martin and I bought the cabin when Caleb was 10. We didn't have much. He was working extra shifts at the paper mill. And I was sewing late into the night to bring in a little extra cash. But Martin insisted. A family needs a place that belongs only to them. He said. He was right. That cabin became the heart of our family. Summers at Lake Everhart were pure magic. Mornings smelled like coffee and pine. Caleb would run barefoot straight to the dock, fishing pole in hand, his laughter echoing across the water. I can still see him, skinny legs dangling, face lit with joy, hollering, "Dad, did you see that one?" When a fish darted away, Martin would sit beside him, patient as stone, showing him how to cast, how to wait. And in the evenings, we'd roast marshmallows until our fingers were sticky, fireflies blinking like stars come down to earth. Birthdays were simple but perfect. A cake from the little grocery in town, paper plates, balloons taped to the wooden beams. Caleb once told me it was his favorite place in the world. Back then I believed him. Back then I believed I knew my son. Even Christmas found its way to that cabin. One year the lake froze solid and Caleb skated clumsily while Martin held him up. I stayed inside by the fire, stringing popcorn for the tree we'd cut ourselves. That cabin wasn't just walls and a roof. It was every season of our lives stitched together. And now gone, sold like a used couch. The Buick was no different. It wasn't just a car. It was Martin's pride. Every Sunday he'd roll up his sleeves, slide under the hood and tinker until the engine purred. He'd whistle while he worked, the same tune over and over. That car carried us to road trips, family weddings, hospital visits, and all the small errands in between. The front seat still carried his cologne, faint but there, like he was sitting beside me. Caleb knew that. He knew exactly what it meant to me. And yet he signed it away with a stranger's pen. I pressed my palms flat on the table, the weight of memory almost crushing. When do our children stop seeing us as parents and start seeing us as burdens? I asked myself. Is it gradual like sand slipping from your hands or sudden like a door slamming shut? I thought about Caleb as a boy, the freckles across his nose, the way he used to climb into our bed during thunderstorms, clutching his blanket. He was sweet once, gentle. He used to draw me pictures of boats and suns and write to Mom, "Love Caleb" in crooked letters. Now the same boy had become a man who could steal from me without blinking. Where did that child go? The truth burned bitter. The sale was illegal. Caleb had never been on the deed. His name was nowhere near that title. That cabin was mine, Martin's and mine, bought with sweat and sacrifice. Caleb didn't sell property, he sold trust. My phone buzzed on the counter, snapping me back. It was Tommy, the caretaker at Lake Everhart. His voice was tight. "MS, Rowan, there's been people poking around, some suit from a company called Viro Holdings, asking neighbors about new ownership. Said your son gave them authority." Authority. The word made my stomach twist. "Listen to me carefully, Tommy," I said, steady. "Do not hand over anything. That property is not theirs. If they try to change locks or step foot inside, you call the sheriff." "Yes, ma'am," he said firmly. "Don't worry, I'll watch over it." When I hung up, I leaned back in my chair. My hands still rested on the iron box, but now I wasn't trembling, because Caleb thought he had left me powerless. He thought I was just an old woman too weak to fight back. What he didn't know, what he could never imagine, was that Martin had always been 3 steps ahead. And so was I now. I reached for the small key Martin had labeled years ago, slid it into the lock, and felt the click. The box creaked open just enough for me to glimpse thick envelopes inside, Martin's neat handwriting marking each one. But before I could lift them out, headlights swept across my window. A sleek car idled at the curb. 2 figures stepped out, a man in a tailored suit and a young woman carrying a leather folder. They walked up my driveway with the same false confidence of door-to-door salesmen. The woman rang the bell and called out sweetly, "Mrs. Rowan, we're from Viro Holdings. Your son signed paperwork authorizing us to finalize the transfer of your property. We just need your cooperation." I stayed behind the door, my pulse steady now, not frantic. "They think I'm weak," I thought. "They are wrong. I don't sign anything on my porch," I said through the wood. "Leave your card." There was a pause, a murmured exchange between them, then the sound of paper sliding against my railing. "We'll be in touch," the woman said. Their footsteps retreated, the car pulled away. Silence settled again. I looked back at the box. Martin's handwriting stared at me from those envelopes. He had known. Somehow he had known this day would come. I touched the lid and whispered, "All right, Martin, I'm ready now." That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to the same thought. Caleb sold the cabin. Caleb sold the Buick. He sold the last traces of Martin. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock tick on the nightstand. Each tick was like a hammer. And then I remembered the iron box. 3 weeks before Martin's heart gave out at the breakfast table, he had pressed a small, heavy box into my hands. It was no bigger than a shoebox, its hinges rusted. "The kind of thing you'd overlook if you didn't know better. Keep this in your closet," he had said, his voice steady but softer than usual. "Don't open it until you're ready. Not just when I'm gone, but when you're truly ready." At the time, I thought it was grief talking, maybe a stack of old letters or family photos. After he died, I pushed the box deep into the closet, behind winter coats, as if forgetting it might also let me forget the ache in my chest. But now I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. At dawn, I got up, slipped into my robe, and walked to the closet. My hands trembled as I pulled the coats aside. There it was, still waiting, still heavy with secrets. I carried it to the bed and sat where Martin and I had spent 45 years of mornings together. The weight of it pressed against my lap, and for a moment I just ran my hands over the cool iron, whispering, "Martin, what did you hide from me?" The lock wasn't even strong. One twist of the key he'd left in the bottom drawer and it clicked open. Inside was a bundle of envelopes, each marked in Martin's neat handwriting. There were savings, bonds, property deeds, share certificates, things I had never seen before. And at the very bottom, a letter folded in half. My breath caught as I opened it. Martin's familiar scrawl filled the page. Asterisk, "My dearest Serena, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't be here to tell you myself. Forgive me for the secrets, but I wanted to protect you from worry and from Caleb's weakness. For years, I invested quietly. The cabin isn't our only property. There are others in Portland, in small towns along the coast. There are savings, bonds, and shares you never knew about. All of it is in your name. You are the true owner. And if Caleb ever forgets who we are, if he ever loses his way, use this to remind him, not with anger, but with wisdom. You always had more strength than you believed. Trust yourself. Trust love, even when it hurts." Asterisk. By the time I finished reading, my cheeks were wet. Martin had been a bus driver his whole life, modest, reliable, steady. I thought I knew every detail of his world, but here he was, even in death, proving me wrong. I pressed the letter to my chest and whispered, "You knew, didn't you? You knew Caleb's hunger for easy money could one day swallow him whole." And in that moment, I realized something I had never admitted out loud. I had spoiled Caleb. I had cleaned up his messes, paid his debts, looked away when he lied. I thought love meant protection. But maybe, just maybe, love sometimes means letting your child fall. The iron box had waited for me in silence. And now it wasn't just a box, it was a choice. Do I use this power to punish Caleb for what he did, or do I use it to teach him what Martin always wanted him to learn? I folded the letter back carefully, set the deeds on the dresser, and wiped my tears. One thing was clear: Martin's secret was no longer a secret. It was my responsibility, and I would not waste it. The morning after I opened Martin's iron box, I sat at the kitchen table with every paper spread out like puzzle pieces. The deeds, the bonds, the letter. My coffee had gone cold, but I barely noticed. I wanted to feel joy, maybe even relief. Instead, all I felt was fire in my chest. Caleb had stolen from me, lied to me, discarded me, and all along I wasn't powerless. I had the cabin, the properties, the savings, everything Martin had built in silence. For a fleeting moment, I thought about storming into town, showing Caleb the truth, and dragging him into court for fraud. The image almost made me smile, my son standing there, humiliated, stripped of his arrogance. But then I heard Martin's voice in my mind, not with anger, Serena, with wisdom. That was the harder path. I picked up the phone and called Gideon Hale, the attorney who had helped with Martin's will after the funeral. He was a man I trusted, measured, discreet, and never one to waste words. "Mrs. Rowan," he said warmly, "it's good to hear from you. How are you holding up?" "I need to see you," I told him. My voice didn't shake, though my hands did. "Today, if possible. Of course, come by at 11. Gideon's office sat in a brick building downtown, the kind with marble floors and wide windows that made you feel both small and important. His secretary offered me tea, but I waved it away. I just wanted answers. When Gideon entered the room, he carried the same air he always did, calm authority wrapped in kindness. "You've brought documents?" he asked. I slid the iron box across his desk. He opened it, brows knitting as he examined each paper. 10 minutes passed in silence, interrupted only by the sound of shuffling pages. Finally he looked up, eyes wide. "Mrs. Rowan, Serena, this is airtight. Your husband was meticulous. These deeds are valid. The bonds are active. The investments are real. You are far wealthier than you imagined." I exhaled shakily. "So I can take everything back. You can reclaim what was sold illegally. The cabin, for instance, it was never Caleb's to sell. We can nullify that transaction immediately, and if you choose, you could even press charges against your son for fraud." The word fraud cut through me like glass. I pictured Caleb's face, the same boy who once built sandcastles at Lake Everhart, the boy who cried when his dog died, the boy I rocked to sleep when storms rattled the windows. Could I drag that boy into court, even if he had grown into a man who betrayed me? "No," I said firmly, surprising even myself. "I won't destroy him, not with lawsuits. That's too easy, too final." Gideon tilted his head. "Then what do you want?" I leaned forward, clutching Martin's letter in my lap. "I want to teach him quietly, without him even realizing it's me." His eyebrows rose. "You want a strategy?" "Yes," I said. My voice steady now. "Not revenge, not rage. A lesson. I want you to secure the cabin, transfer full control of the properties into my name, and do it without Caleb knowing. I'll decide how and when he learns the truth." Gideon studied me for a long moment. "That will take patience." "I've been a mother for over 40 years, I replied. "Patience is the one thing I've mastered." When I left his office, the city felt different. The same cars rushed past. The same shops opened their doors, but for me, everything had shifted. I wasn't a discarded widow anymore. I was a woman with a plan. I walked slower than usual, almost savoring the secret. People on the street looked at me and saw an old woman in a worn coat, but inside I carried the weight of an empire Martin had built for me. Strategy over rage, wisdom over anger, love even when it hurt. Martin had trusted me with this legacy, and I was going to use it, not to punish our son, but to save him, even if he hated me for it. Patience. That was the word I carried with me after leaving Gideon's office. I tended my garden, baked pies for the church fundraiser, smiled at neighbors who pitied me. On the outside, I was still the abandoned widow everyone whispered about. But inside, I was watching the storm gather around Caleb, and it didn't take long for the cracks to show. It started with whispers at the grocery store. "Did you hear? Caleb Rowan's Europe venture isn't real. They say he dragged Lydia into loans she didn't even understand. Poor woman, she thought she married a businessman. Turns out he's drowning in debt." I kept my face neutral as I bagged apples, but inside I felt the slow satisfaction of truth catching up. By the end of the week, the whispers grew into headlines on the local bulletin board. Foreclosure notices, bank investigations, rumors that Lydia had packed her bags. One evening, my neighbor June stopped by with a casserole. She leaned close as if confessing a crime. "Serena, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but word is Lydia's threatening to leave him. She says Caleb ruined her life. Folks are saying he'll have no choice but to crawl back home." I thanked her politely, set the casserole on the counter, and thought, let him crawl. 3 weeks later, it happened. I was folding laundry when I heard a knock at the door, loud, frantic, almost desperate. When I opened it, there stood Caleb. His once expensive jacket was wrinkled, his shoes scuffed, his face pale with exhaustion. He looked nothing like the proud man who had boarded a plane to Europe with a suitcase full of my sacrifices. "Mom," he said hoarsely, "please, I need to come in." I stepped aside, calm as stone. "Of course." He stumbled into the kitchen, dropped into a chair, and buried his face in his hands. For a long moment, the only sound was his shallow breathing. Finally, he lifted his head. "Everything's gone," he whispered. "Lydia left me in Paris. She said I ruined her. The investors pulled out. The banks are circling. I don't have a dollar to my name. Mom, I don't even have a place to sleep." I studied him quietly. His hands trembled, his eyes rimmed red. This was not a son returning triumphant. This was a man gutted by his own choices. "Would you like some tea?" I asked gently. He blinked, stunned. "Tea, Mom? I just told you my life is falling apart." "Yes," I said, setting the kettle on the stove. "And tea helps us think clearer." When I placed the cup in front of him, he wrapped his fingers around it like it was the only warmth left in the world. "Mom," he said, voice breaking, "I'm so sorry. I don't know what else to say. I treated you like garbage, and now you're the only person I can turn to. I don't deserve this chair or your roof or even your tea, but please don't turn me away." I sat down across from him, folded my hands, and met his eyes. "Caleb, life has a way of stripping us down until we face who we really are. You left me with nothing, and now life has left you with nothing. Perhaps this is where we start." He bowed his head, tears dripping onto the table. For the first time, he wasn't bargaining, wasn't bluffing. He was simply broken. That night, after he fell asleep in his old childhood room, I stood in the doorway and watched him. The same walls that once held posters of baseball players now held silence. He looked younger, smaller, as if the years of arrogance had melted away, leaving only the boy Martin and I once tucked in. In my chest, the ache softened, not into forgiveness yet, but into something close. And I thought, children discard parents until we're the only ones left. Maybe that's when they finally see us for what we've always been. The morning after Caleb returned, the house felt heavier. I heard the creak of his old bedroom floorboards, the same ones that once squeaked under his teenage sneakers. Only now the sound was slower, burdened, almost ashamed. I peeked in once. He was sitting on the edge of his childhood bed, shoulders slumped, staring at the posters that still clung to the walls. Faded baseball heroes, a cracked frame with a high school team photo. The room had been frozen in time, but Caleb wasn't. He looked like a man wearing clothes borrowed from a boy who no longer existed. He caught me in the doorway. "It's humiliating," he said flatly, "sleeping in this room again." I answered calmly, "Sometimes humiliation is the beginning of humility." He didn't reply, he just turned his face away. At breakfast, he pushed scrambled eggs around his plate like a restless child. "People must be talking," he muttered. "They've always talked," I said. "What matters is whether you listen." He looked at me then, a flash of irritation crossing his face. But beneath it, I saw the weariness. He was angry, yes, but not at me, at himself. That afternoon, his phone buzzed. He stepped out onto the porch to answer, but the walls of this house are thin. I heard every word. It was Lydia. Her voice was sharp, almost panicked. "You ruined me, Caleb. You dragged me into this mess, and now my name is tied to your debts. Do you know what people are saying about me? Do you know what you've done?" He tried to defend himself, his voice cracking. "Lydia, I didn't mean," but she cut him off. "Don't call me again, we're finished." Then silence. He came back inside, pale, his phone hanging limply in his hand. "She's gone," he said simply, collapsing into a chair. "For good." I poured him a glass of water and set it down. He didn't touch it. The days that followed were quiet. Caleb moved through the house like a ghost. He slept late, ate little, paced at night. Sometimes I'd find him standing at the window, staring out at the street as if searching for the man he used to be. I let him be. I didn't press. I didn't lecture. I simply kept the house steady, meals at the same time, the kettle whistling, laundry folded neatly on the chair. The kind of rhythm Martin and I had always kept, because what Caleb needed wasn't more chaos, he needed stillness. A mirror. One evening he sat at the kitchen table long after dinner, his head in his hands. "Mom," he said quietly, "I don't even recognize myself anymore. I thought I was building a life worth bragging about. And now I'm just a man eating his mother's food in the same chair where I ate as a child." I reached over, touched his wrist, and said the truth he needed. "Failure is the best mirror, Caleb. It doesn't show us who we wanted to be. It shows us who we really are." His eyes filled with tears. He didn't argue, he didn't protest, he just nodded. And for the first time I saw the faintest crack of light in all that darkness. The silence in my house couldn't last forever. Bills still came. The fridge still needed filling. And sooner or later, even a broken man has to decide whether to sink or swim. One morning, Caleb shuffled into the kitchen holding a folded newspaper. He dropped it on the table between us. The classifieds were circled in red ink. "I need work," he muttered. His voice was low, embarrassed, as if just saying the words tasted bitter. I poured coffee into his cup. "Then work." 2 days later, he came home with a pair of cheap steel-toed boots and a paper contract. The job was janitorial, night shifts at a downtown office building, cleaning bathrooms and mopping floors from midnight to sunrise. When he first told me, his jaw was clenched. "It's the only thing I could get," he said, as though daring me to laugh. But I didn't. I only answered, "It's honest." That first week nearly crushed him. He'd stumble through the door as the sun was rising, shirt damp with sweat. The sharp sting of bleach clinging to his clothes. His hands, once soft from years of chasing shortcuts, blistered and cracked. At the table he grumbled, "It's humiliating, Mom, cleaning toilets for people who don't even look me in the eye." I kept my voice steady. "Humiliation doesn't last, discipline does." He didn't reply. But the next night he went back to work anyway. Something began to shift in him after a few weeks. One morning, he sat down with his bowl of oatmeal and said quietly, "There's this guy on my crew, Walter, 65 years old. He's been mopping floors for 3 decades, doesn't complain. Just hums hymns while he works. Told me last night, son, work is work. You show up, do your best, and go home with your head high. That's what matters." He shook his head almost in disbelief. I thought I was better than men like him. Turns out he's stronger than I've ever been. A few nights later he told me about Mrs. Lopez, a widowed grandmother who worked 2 jobs yet still brought tamales to share with the staff during breaks. She said feeding people makes her feel rich, he said softly. Can you believe that? I smiled into my coffee, though I didn't let him see. These people were teaching him what no lecture of mine ever could. Then came the night he sat at the table with blistered hands wrapped around a steaming bowl of soup. He didn't complain about the plain broth, didn't roll his eyes at the lack of meat. He just ate quietly, slowly, gratefully. When he finished, he looked up and said, "Thank you, Mom, that was really good." Just 6 words, but they landed in my heart heavier than gold. Later, as he slept upstairs, I sat alone in Martin's chair. I thought about how our son had once demanded more, always more, fancier meals, bigger cars, faster money. Now he was learning that dignity isn't in what we own, but in what we earn. I whispered into the quiet house, "He's changing, Martin, not quickly. Not easily, but he's finally learning the weight of work." And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, my son was on his way back to becoming a man. By the time winter thinned into spring, Caleb had grown quieter. The bitterness in his voice had dulled. The complaints about long nights had turned into stories about Walter's hymns or Mrs. Lopez's jokes. His hands were rough, his shoulders leaner, his steps slower, but for the first time in years there was a steadiness about him. That was when I knew it was time. One Sunday morning over toast and coffee, I set my mug down and said, "I want you to come with me tomorrow to see Gideon Hale." Caleb stiffened, suspicion flashing in his eyes. "A lawyer? Why, are you finally throwing me to the wolves?" "No," I said calmly. "Just trust me, you'll see." He didn't argue, but the wariness never left his face. The next day we walked into Gideon's downtown office. Caleb's shoulders were hunched, his jacket frayed at the elbows. He looked like a man bracing for more bad news, ready to be shamed again. Gideon greeted us warmly. "Mrs. Rowan, Caleb, please sit down." Caleb slouched in his chair, arms crossed. "Let's just get this over with," he muttered. Gideon slid a folder across the desk. "Caleb, I've reviewed the paperwork from your loans. There's something you need to understand. Many of those debts were not yours. Lydia's associate, Edward Fisher, was forging signature. Several documents have already been flagged as fraudulent." Caleb blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, are you saying I'm not the one who signed them?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Gideon replied. "You were reckless, yes, you chased a scheme that collapsed, but the deepest traps, they were laid by Edward. You're not as guilty as you believed." For a moment, Caleb just stared as if someone had lifted 100 pounds from his chest. He rubbed his eyes, voice breaking. I thought it was all me. I thought I destroyed everything." Gideon's gaze softened. "Not everything, not beyond repair. But the true shock hadn't come yet." I nodded toward Gideon. "Show him the rest." The lawyer pulled out another stack of papers, deeds, bonds, investments, all signed neatly in Martin's steady hand. He slid them across the table. Caleb picked one up, confusion spreading over his face. "This says the Lake Everhart cabin belongs to you, Mom, but I sold it." "You tried to," Gideon corrected. "But it was never yours to sell. It was never in your name. It was always your mother's." Caleb's hand trembled as he flipped through the stack. "Properties in Portland, on the coast, investments. Mom, what is all this?" I looked straight at him. "It's your father's legacy. He left it to me quietly, carefully, because he knew there might come a day when you would forget who we are." Caleb's face went pale, his voice rose, cracking. "You had all this and you let me think you were poor, that you had nothing." "Yes," I answered. My voice was steady, though my heart thudded. He slammed the papers down. "Why? Why would you do that to me?" "Because," I said firmly, "you needed to learn what no inheritance could ever teach. That money without character is poison. That comfort without effort is a curse. And that love isn't always indulgence, it's discipline. Sometimes the only way to save a son is to let him taste the hunger of his own choices." The room went still. The only sound was the ticking of Gideon's clock on the wall. Caleb's hands covered his face. His shoulders shook, not with rage this time, but with something deeper, something like grief. He whispered through his fingers, "I don't know if I hate you for this, or if I finally understand you." I reached across the table and laid my hand over his. "You don't have to understand me yet. Just keep living. The rest will come." And for the first time I saw not the arrogance of the boy he once was, but the weight of the man he might still become. The ride home from Gideon's office was silent. Caleb stared out the passenger window, his jaw tight, the city lights flickering across his face. He didn't say a word, not even when we pulled into the driveway. But that night, long after I'd gone to bed, I heard a door creak open. Footsteps shuffled down the hall, a soft knock at my bedroom door. "Mom," he whispered, Can I talk to you?" I switched on the lamp and nodded. He came in. Sat on the edge of my bed like he was 10 years old again after a nightmare. His shoulders shook, and then finally the dam broke. "I was blind," he choked out. Tears streaked his face. "I treated you like you were nothing, disposable, like the years you sacrificed didn't matter. I saw you as an ATM, not as my mother. God, Mom, I don't know how you even looked at me." He buried his face in his hands, sobs breaking through the silence. I let him cry. Sometimes words only cheapen the weight of remorse. When his breathing finally steadied, I laid my hand on his arm. "Caleb," I said softly, "you are my son. That will never change. But respect. Respect isn't a gift I can hand back to you. It's something you have to earn. Forgiveness I can give. Respect you must live." His eyes met mine, swollen and red. "Then let me try, please. I don't deserve it, but let me try." The next morning he came down to the kitchen with his work boots already laced. His voice was rough but determined. "I'm not quitting the janitor job. It's the only honest thing I've got right now." I nodded. "Good. And I went online last night," he added, sliding a folded paper across the table. It was an enrollment form from the local community college. Night classes, business and accounting. I want to learn how to do things right this time, from the ground up. For the first time in years, I felt something other than anger or grief when I looked at him. I felt hope. Later, as he left for work, I stood by the window and watched him walk down the street. Boots scuffing against the pavement, shoulders squared just a little higher than before. He wasn't fixed, not by a long shot, but he was finally facing forward instead of spiraling backward. I thought about my own role in all this. How many times had I swooped in, covered his debts, smoothed his mistakes, convinced myself I was protecting him? But protection without consequence isn't love, it's sabotage. I had built a cage of comfort around him, and it had taken everything, betrayal, ruin, hard labor, to break him free. Generations repeat mistakes when we rescue too quickly, I realized. Sometimes the kindest thing a parent can do is step back and let their child feel the fall. That night, as I turned off the lights and settled into Martin's chair, I whispered into the dark, "He's learning love. Finally, he's learning." 6 months later, the seasons had turned. The lake thawed, the pines dripped with green, and the cabin, once a ghost of memories, waited for us like an old friend needing care. Caleb and I drove out one Saturday with a truck full of paint cans, tools, and groceries. He wore the same worn boots from his janitor job, laces frayed, leather cracked, but his stride was steady. His hands were rough now, blistered and scarred, the hands of a man who had finally met his own labor. When we pulled up, the porch sagged, weeds strangled the steps, and dust coated the windows. Caleb stood there a long moment, quiet. Then he whispered, "I almost destroyed this place." I touched his arm, "And now you'll bring it back to life." The day filled with work. Caleb scraped peeling paint, hammering loose boards back into place. Sweat ran down his temples, soaking his shirt, but he didn't complain. I cooked inside, beans simmering on the stove, cornbread browning in the oven, letting the smell drift out the open windows like a promise. By late afternoon, I watched from the kitchen as Caleb painted the porch railings, his strokes slow but steady. The sunlight caught his face, lined with exhaustion but lit with something new, resolve. He set down the brush, flexed his raw hands, and gave me a tired grin through the window. For the first time in years, I felt the house breathe again. That evening we sat on the porch steps, the boards still tacky with fresh paint, bowls of warm food balanced in our laps. Caleb stared at the lake, the water catching the last fire of sunset. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "this cabin shouldn't just be ours. There are so many people out there starting over, single parents. Folks with nothing but debt and shame just like me. What if we turn this place into a retreat for them? A chance to breathe, to heal, to remember life isn't finished just because it's broken." Tears stung my eyes. Martin would have loved that idea. "Yes," I whispered, "let's make it a place for second chances." Later, when Caleb had gone inside, I stayed on the porch alone. The night air was cool, the lake calm under the stars. I closed my eyes and spoke softly, as if Martin could hear me. "He finally understands," I murmured. "You were right to trust me. It wasn't about revenge, it was about letting him walk through the fire until he found his way." This cabin will hold more than our story now. It will hold the stories of people learning to live again. For the first time since Martin's death, I felt peace, not because everything was fixed, but because healing had begun. And now, to you who have listened to my story, true justice isn't revenge. It isn't humiliation. It's transformation, the kind that takes time, pain, and love that doesn't always look like kindness. So let me ask you, what would you do if your own child betrayed you? Could you forgive them, guide them back, or would you close the door forever? Tell me in the comments. And if this story touched you, please subscribe and share, because healing isn't a fairy tale ending. It's the long, hard work of turning broken pieces into something new. The cabin didn't become a fairy tale ending. It became something better, a place where pain turned into purpose. Caleb still carries his scars, just as I carry mine. Some days he struggles, some days I still feel the sting of his betrayal. But we keep showing up for each other, for this house, and for the families who now walk through its doors searching for a second chance. Maybe that's what life really is, not perfect endings, but imperfect people choosing to build something better out of broken pieces. So I'll leave you with this. If someone you love hurt you deeply, would you believe in their change, or would you close your heart forever? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if this touched you, please subscribe and share. Together we can spread stories that remind us that healing isn't about going back to what was. It's about creating something new, something stronger, something more human.